I'm Frederick Lane. I was born in Farnborough Hospital, near Orpington in Kent. When the war started, when I was 3 years old, we came to Eastbourne to live with my grandmother because my father was away in the army. My mother came from Eastbourne. They were an Eastbourne family. And when I was 13, I left Eastbourne and went back to Orpington and came back here 20 years ago. My earliest memories, because I was 4 when we arrived in Eastbourne, and the thing that struck me most was that my grandmother had a Morrison shelter in the back room of a house in Windermere Crescent in Eastbourne, and we slept in that all the time at night. But and also we went in there when the air raid sirens sounded, and there was an air raid siren on the old roof of the Destructor Works building, which was opposite where she lived. And I think that made the most impression, about sleeping in this tin box virtually, and that was my first memories of it. We stayed with my grandmother for a while. Obviously, there was bombing raids going on. I went to St Andrew's School, and I can remember the first bit of bombing I can remember was that we were in the school, the air raid sirens went, we walked across a short yard into the brick air raid shelters. But as we passed across this little short yard, we could see the gas holders going up in flames because somebody dropped a bomb right into the gas holder. And that was quite impressive to us. And then after that, we stayed with my grandmother for a while, and then my mother was offered a house in Astaire Avenue. Astaire Avenue wasn't quite like it is now. It was a very short road. We were just beyond the end of Astaire Avenue. There were just the fields and the marshes, and at the top of the road there was a Bofor gun on a little hill. And my brother and myself, we used to go up and talk to the soldiers. And I can remember being up there a few times when the soldiers grabbed us by the neck, pushed us into their dugout, and we watched as the shells were going down the rack as they were firing their anti-aircraft gun up into the air. And another scene that I've got a photo in my mind of was that we were in our garden, my brother and myself, in Astaire Avenue, and a German fighter bomber came along at rooftop level, and my brother and myself were waving to the pilot, and I've still got a picture of him sitting in his plane in his leather helmet, and apparently he machine gunned some houses further up the road, but we were just waving to him. My mother was indoors looking out the window and nearly had a fit when she saw what we were doing. Then also remember a house being built, bombed in Marlow Avenue, and we went round and looked at that, and there was all the beds hanging out the windows. It was close to the electricity substation, and we were quite impressed with this, with the walls damaged. And another scene of bombing was when they bombed the Marks and Spencer's building, and I remember going by with my mother, and they were still sifting through the rubble, and there was still smoke coming up off there. There were quite a few people killed in that at Christmas. It was at Christmas time, and the people were queuing up for the extra ration of cake, and that's why it was quite crowded. Then for a short time, for some reason, we went to live with my uncle, who lived up in Meads, up at Boston House. He was caretaking Boston House, which was empty, which was a teacher training college. And also he had a small holding up at the top of Carlisle Road, where he grew things for the Ministry of Agriculture, as it was then. And we used to wander down the road, wander down into town. I can remember them having a practice with tear gas in the town, and we all had to put the gas mask, which we all had to carry, put the gas masks on, and then when we took it off, it was still around, this gas, and your eyes stream with water. The other was other things on top of the houses near Roselands. There was a flat roof, and I remember there was a man up there with a machine gun. Was up there as an anti-aircraft precaution. Never actually saw him fire it, but we often used to go past and saw him up there. I do remember up at my uncle's bull holding, because we used to go up there then. I mean, later on in years, I used to help him there when I was a schoolboy, get a few pence for helping out on the small holding. But I remember going up there collecting the foil that they used to drop to confuse the radar. We used to climb over the hills there. That was towards the end of the war, when the Germans came over and dropped all this foil to confuse our radar. And we were up somewhere up on the hills just above Meads, and I don't know why we were up there, because it wasn't usual in those days to go up there during the war. But I can remember sitting up there, looking back across the town and watching the hit and run raiders come in and drop in their small bombs that they used to drop, and the guns firing at them as well. But I think it was probably only once or maybe twice, but I remember that occasion. But why we were up on the hills, I've no idea. I remember all the scaffolding being out in the sea, all the way along the seafront, to stop the Germans invading. Whether it would have done, I don't know, but there was a lot of scaffolding all the way out in the sea, right along the coast, and barbed wire along all the promenades. And I remember we used to go up there sometimes, and how we used to climb through these coils of barbed wire and get our trousers ripped and get into terrible trouble because her mother couldn't get replacements because of the war was on. And a person we called an uncle, it was Charlie Grant. He was well known down in Pevensey Bay. He had a fishing boat down in Pevensey Bay, and there was just one gap in the scaffolding so he could get his boat in and out. And a couple of times we went out with him, but he wanted to go to Dunkirk, but they wouldn't let him because his boat was too valuable for fishing. And so it's quite interesting down there as well. Yeah, I remember my mother pushing my brother in a pushchair, me having to walk out on the Black Path, as it was called then, out over the Crumbles, to the Barn Hill. And I can remember picking up tins with no labels on and putting them in the pushchair. And we went back and we took potluck on what was coming out of the tins. But yes, I do remember the Barn Hill being up on the beach there, yes. One other thing about the wartime was D-Day. We were up in Meads then, staying with my uncle, and all down Carlisle Road and all around that area there were trucks and tanks and everything in echelon all down the roads, and soldiers and halfway down from where it joins the sort of Meads Road, there was a roadblock with sandbags and what have you. You had to zigzag through it to get out with soldiers guarding. And we didn't know, but the night before D-Day, they were all there. We got up in the morning and everybody had gone. We couldn't make out what had happened. The whole place was empty. All the lorries had gone, the soldiers had gone, and But then we found out, obviously, it was D-Day. They were going to New Haven and places, the Canadians and others there. There was a lot of Canadians about, I remember. Later on, the Americans were there, and we used to go to their Naffy and Gordick Road and stand outside and cadge sweets off them. My uncle had a win on a football pool, so he was lucky. It wasn't the sort of money you get now, but it was quite reasonable. And he used to treat us to the hippodrome, and so it was a shilling, I think, to go in then. And we used to go and see the shows and various plays like Arsenic and Old Lace. And Max Miller was there on one occasion. I remember seeing him. I wanted to go when Jane of the Daily Mirror was there, but they wouldn't let me go. I said, "You're too young to go." But I was interested. But yes, it was quite. We used to go quite regularly to there, and the cinemas, the Gaiety and the Regal down in Seaside, the Tivoli and the Central, which was in the top part of Seaside Road. Then there's a Picturedrome and the posh one, the Luxor, occasionally with its organ going up and down in the interval. And there was another one round by Trinity Trees. I think that was a classic. And at one time, the Winter Garden was showed films at one time, part of the Winter Garden, because I can remember that because my brother and I went up there to what I can still remember it now. It was a Tarzan film. And in those days, the film sort of went on continuously. You had two films, and it went round and started again. And we were in there, and my father had told me to come back a certain time, but we sat round for the next one, and suddenly the usherette was coming along through with a torch along the seat looking for us. And my father was furious because he had to go somewhere and he was expecting us to be home. So we got into terrible trouble for that. But we didn't seem to mind too much. But yes, we went to all the cinemas. Well, it has. It was a small seaside town during the war and when I was young here. And it's expanded so greatly to the east, I suppose you'd say, to the east, where beyond Prince's Park, which was the edge of the town then, and just beyond that was the rubbish tip. It was because that's where I got my first bike made up from bits from the rubbish tip, where the Sovereign Centre is now. And then there was the Crumbles, of course, right through to Pevensey. And Friday Street was just a small track with the abattoir out to Stone Cross. And beyond that, there was nothing. It was just fields. So there's been vast expansion all down that end of the town. And also, of course, up in the other parts of the town, there were just the large houses, the gentry mostly, as they called them. And now they've been replaced with large blocks of flats. So there's been considerable changes since those days. Yeah, when we decided to leave Sevenoaks, because we had a big-ish house and garden, and it got too much for us, so we came back to Eastbourne. Our son was here at the Brighton University. He'd come as a mature student because he's a carpenter and joiner, and he decided to go back to university, and he came down here and studied, and he now lives in France with his family. But we came back here and we found this house, which we thought was in a fantastic position, right next to the park. And so we've now come back, and this is where we will stay for the rest of our time in Eastbourne, I'm sure.